So when you're working in Illustrator, it's important to know some of the basic elements that are on the screen itself. You can show and hide these various elements depending on what you're working on, what you need to see at the time. For now, I have all of the default ones showing. If you have a case where not all of them are showing on your screen, or they disappear at some point or something like that, there are a couple of things you can do. The first one I would start with is go to the top menu bar, select Window, select Workspace, and then select Essentials Classic. What that will do is that will show all of the elements that you see here on the screen. So if you find that I'm talking about something on the screen and you're not seeing it on your computer, try this. Go to Window, Workspace, Essentials Classic, click that, and it should show you all these elements on the screen. Artboards are the workspace that you work in Illustrator. The top bar menu just works like standard in any application. I'm sure you're familiar with how that works in most things. We'll talk about some specific things that are in the top bar menu. We have the Tools panel on the left-hand side of the screen here. I've got most of the tools showing currently. And these are the most common ones that we'll use. Some of these we won't really use too much, but they're all available on there. You can change what's available on the Tools panel by clicking the three dots in the bottom and selecting which ones you want to show up on your panel. You can see that these are all grayed out because they're all showing there right now pretty much. Now you don't see them all the time. You don't see all the things all the time. So you can see there are many more tools on here than we're seeing on the Tools panel currently. And that's because Illustrator and the other Adobe apps use a system with the small triangle at the bottom right of each icon. And if you hold down the mouse or your trackpad or whatever you're using, you'll see it pops up a little menu and you can pick other tools from that little menu. So that's true on all of the tools that have that little triangle. So if you're not seeing something, or if something seems to disappear, just have to remember that it's probably available under that triangle. And if I were to pick something like the ellipse tool, you'll see that shows up here, but now the rectangle tool is hidden. So if I wanted the rectangle, I'd have to go pick that again. And that's the same for many of these tools on here. So it's just something to get used to. Underneath the tools, we've got these two color icons here. Illustrator uses a system of building shapes with fills and strokes. A fill is just the inside color of a shape. The stroke is the outside border color of a shape. So that's why in this case, you can see the black color is outlined. That's the stroke color or the outline color, and the white is the fill color. Double click on them to select a new color if you want to. You select the hue by using this control in the middle, and you select the value and the lightness, darkness, saturation by moving around the bigger rectangle in there. Let's see, we'll pick something a little brighter here. And the stroke color works the same way. Double click that and you can pick a different stroke color. You'll see at the same time, in this case, the color selector up here popped up. We'll talk about that in a minute. At the bottom of the screen, there is a help bar, and you'll see that based on whatever tool you select, it'll give you different kinds of help. So as I select different tools, it gives you a little bit different information in there. On the top part of the screen, you can see we have something called the control panel. This control panel is just a brief thing that has some of the settings for various tools. And as you add stuff to the screen, as you add objects onto the screen, it will have settings for those objects when they're selected. So you'll see different things on this control panel. If we add a rectangle to the screen, in this case, I'm clicking the rectangle icon, clicking and dragging to set a rectangle on the screen. And now you can see it has added a few different options on here. So it's got the colors for this object. the fill and the stroke. You can change them from here if you want to. You can change the size of the stroke if you want to from here. You can change the style of the stroke. You can change the appearance of the stroke in other ways here. You can set the opacity of the object. Opacity is transparency. So you can make it more or less transparent if you want to. So you can do quite a bit just by using the control panel. One of the most important sections that you use as you're working with objects in Illustrator is the Properties panel. That's over here on the right-hand side of the screen. And you can see it has a lot of the same things that the control panel has, but it also has additional items in it. So it has the same appearance items. It has fill, stroke, and opacity. It has some transform options in there. You can specify specific sizes if you know you want, an object to be specifically a certain number of inches or points or pixels. You can set that in there. You can change the angle of objects. You can reflect them. You can add some effects and things. You can align them. You can do a bunch of different things on there. But this properties panel is one of the panels I work the most with when you're trying to change the appearance of objects. Same as in the control panel, you can change the fill color. You can change the stroke color. And you can change the stroke thickness. You can change the opacity just like you can in the control panel. So either one works. The Properties panel, however, also has a number of items that are kind of sub-panels to the Properties panel. Those are these icons just to the left of the Properties panel. We've got a color icon. You can use that as a color picker so you can get more custom colors in your object. So if you wanted to select a different fill color that is not in the normal set of swatches for fills, you can do it there. We've got something called a color guide, which gives you a starting point for colors. So you can see that the first shade in here, or rather the one with the arrow, is the shade that's inside right now for our fill. And it's giving you some variations of that color that you can use. That can help sometimes if you're trying to keep everything within your color palette, which is important to do. So color guide is there. We've got the brushes panel, which will allow you to change the style of the stroke, just like you could do in the control panel. We've got some symbols. It can be helpful to create symbols if you have some unique elements that you want to create for your artwork, and you are using them repeatedly throughout your design. You can create them as a symbol, save them as a symbol, and then reuse them. There are some stroke settings that you don't find in the control panel at the top or in the regular properties panel. And they've got some things like changing the corners of the object. So you can see I clicked a little bit of a rounded corner and it rounded it off a little bit. You can click a beveled corner. If you have a straight line on the screen, you can change the end of the line to be rounded. You can change it to be squared off. You can add arrowheads either to the left side or to the right side of the line. You can change the scale of the lines. You can change the profile again, same as in the control panel or in the properties panel. You can add a gradient to an object. And if you're not familiar, gradients are just a transition from one color to another. Gradients get pretty involved, so we'll talk about them a little bit later, but in general, you've got the gradient window here. You can click on the gradient itself, and you can change the colors in the gradient by double-clicking the circles. changing the appearance of the gradient. We'll talk more about gradients. There are several ways to add gradients in Illustrator. Below the gradient icon is the transparency icon. This is an important one that is a little bit unique because you're changing the way that the shape applies itself to the illustration. We'll talk about this in more detail as we talk about masks and things like that. Below the transparency icon is the appearance icon. And this is handy for any time you're changing the appearance of an object, especially if you're using things like special effects, drop shadows, blending modes, blurs, anything like that. Any of those kinds of changes that are applied, you can see the whole list of them in the appearance panel, and you can just change and you can remove them or change them easily in this panel. Graphic styles is the next icon down on the properties panel. We're not going to talk about that too much. I would avoid using these kinds of styles for the most part. Create your own styles. Below that is one that we'll use all the time. That's the layers panel. We'll talk more about layers because they get a little bit involved, but one of the most important things I'm going to ask you to do in your project is to rename your layers. So in this case, we have the default names for each of the objects, but if I wanted to name, I just double click on them and I can say, blue rectangle and arrow, whatever it is. The next icon down is an asset export function. We're not going to talk about that too much right now. In fact, not at all. We're going to skip that for now. Next one we'll talk about is the artboard section. Artboards is this work area, as we talked about. If you recall, when you set up the new file, you told it to create, if you did it the way I did it here, told it to have a white background, so you have an artboard. If you use the magnifying glass on, I'm just going to shrink this up for a minute so you see that. If you use the magnifying glass, hold the Option key or the Alt key on Windows and then click, it'll zoom out and you can see that there's a lot more space around the artboard. So in the artboard panel, you can add a new artboard by clicking the plus down at the bottom of the screen. And you see it added a new artboard. And you can add as many artboards as you want. I'll just zoom out again so you can see them all. So now I have 4 artboards, and these are just workspaces where you can do stuff. I find artboards are handy if you want to save your work on one area while you work on ideas in another area, or while you build elements for the idea in another area. It can also be if you're doing something like a brochure or something that it has a front and a back or multiple pages, you can do each page on a different artboard. That can work well. But for the most part, I use them as separate work areas depending on what the project is. You can organize your artboard several ways to make it a little bit easier to work with. The easiest is by using this icon called Rearrange down at the bottom of the artboard window. And this will just let you sort of automatically rearrange things. So in this case, it'll move it to 2 columns instead of 1 row. If you click OK, it changes it into 2 columns, so sometimes that's a little easier to work with. You can also change them by using this icon on the toolbar. It's called the Artboard tool. You'll see when you click it, the selected artboard has these blue lines around it. You can add a new artboard. You can change the artboards. You can move them by themselves. You can change the sizes of the artboards. Create all different sized artboards if that's what you need to do. One final thing that we have here, it's called the contextual taskbar. And that is this little bar that shows up at the bottom here. This gives you some of the properties for whatever object you have selected currently. So you see it changes a little bit. So you can do some of the same changes here. You can change the color and the stroke. You can do various things with this taskbar. And then you can move the taskbar. You can hide it if it gets in the way, because sometimes it does get in the way. You can move the position. You can pin the bar position, which is kind of what I tend to do a lot of times because I like to move it out of the way. And I find if it's popping up over the object, it's hard to work with sometimes. So that's it for the intro to the UI in Illustrator.